I'm joined now live by Ben Twomey, who's the Chief Executive of Generation Rent. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Jim.
Do these figures surprise you?
Unfortunately, it's no surprise at all. We've known for a long time that rents are unaffordable in this country, and there seems to be a real lack of action from the government on this. Compare, for example, to mortgage holders, where they have our deep sympathies in terms of the interest rate rises. The government was quite quick to react, to put in a package to help them, but 22% is the average rent rise for new rents since 2021, and there hasn't been anything like the level of response to help renters.
It is one of the problems that a lot of people that they might rent off a landlord who has got a mortgage for that property, and they're just simply having to either pass on the costs because they can't afford it themselves, or that kind of reason, basically.
That's a reason that is used by some landlords, but 3 in 5 landlords, it's worth pointing out, don't have a mortgage on their buy-to-let property. No one's forcing them to cash in on economic uncertainty. If they hike rents, it's because they're choosing to do so.
So are rent controls the answer? I know lots of landlords don't like it.
The long-term answer has got to be to build more homes, but right now there needs to be help for affordability. So I think the government needs to be looking at absolutely anything they can do to protect renters, to make sure that we're going to see fewer evictions over the summer holidays, and make sure that we can protect people's wallets, because the cost of living crisis, we often talk about bills, we often talk about food prices. In terms of our research at Generation Rent, we found the biggest concern to renters is actually whether or not they can continue to afford their rent, whether they can keep a roof over their heads.
Do we know how much people are spending each month in terms of their monthly pay packet on putting a roof over their head?
Yes, so it's actually the highest it's been in over a decade. At the moment, a third of renters' average wage is going straight into the pocket of landlords across the country. In London, that's 40% of the wage before tax going into landlords' pockets. So it's a really significant part of what the financial vulnerability you're talking about comes from. And that's because the rents, like I say, have been so unaffordable for so long that we're reaching a kind of tipping point where action really needs to be taken as urgently as possible. And
there isn't much financial support, I imagine, for most people.
That's correct. If you're on a lower income where you actually have the safety net of the welfare system, you could have access to local housing allowance. You could get discretionary payments from your council, but those have been frozen for a long time. Those have been, they're only applied to a certain number of renters. It's not everyone that's available to. One group in particular we're concerned about is parents and how children are being affected by this. So lone parents at the moment are really suffering, where over a quarter of them said just in the last 2 weeks they've run out of food. And if a child can't eat, they'll struggle to sleep. If a child can't sleep, they'll struggle to learn at school. So if rents continue to be unaffordable to the point where this is happening with child poverty, not only is it damaging and desperate right now, but the knock-on effect could limit the opportunities for the next generation too.
And it's perfectly normal, isn't it, I suppose, in big cities for people to multiple occupancy flats, and more people having to share, not being able to have their own space.
That's right. Having to choose a room rather than a flat or a home is becoming increasingly common. It's a difficult one because it's the only way, if you're on benefits, it's the only type of benefit that you're allowed access to up until the age of 35. So in many ways, it's not a needs-based way of providing benefits. It's just an arbitrary line drawn in the sand for those under 35, where they get a lower rate of housing benefit. But for anyone else who isn't accessing benefits, they're finding themselves more and more having to make compromises. And those compromises involve being in a smaller space, maybe only having a room, being further away from work, further away from the school run, where they have to have a longer commute. And ultimately, for some people, they're having to move out of their communities entirely. So they're being uprooted, essentially, because of this. And that's really bad for society on the whole, because we need communities to feel strong and connected if we're going to have the best possible outcomes for not only young people growing up in those areas, but for everyone to feel connected and to do well in life.
Are there measures in place? Should there be measures in place, say, if somebody is renting a property and they've been there for, 3 or 4 years, and each year the landlord hasn't really increased the amount that the tenant has to pay, but suddenly around now says, actually, we're going to increase it by a couple of £100 a month, which is clearly unaffordable. I mean, are they allowed to do that? And should that change if they are?
So landlords shouldn't be raising the rent above the market rate, but of course the market rate is what kind of happens across the whole picture, and that's what's been going up so rapidly. So if you do feel that your rent is being raised beyond that, then you can take that to the housing tribunal, in which case they can look into it for you, and you may be able to challenge it there. So it's important to know your rights if you're a renter in that respect. But to put this in context, our last survey of renters found that 50% had been asked to pay higher rent in the last 12 months. So it's very rare to find a number of years in which there's been no rent rise at all. Of course, when that does happen, it's fantastic. It means that the landlord is of course making that agreement with the tenant. But there needs to be protections, as I said before, that are equivalent to what's happening in the mortgage sector. And the government's been very quick to step in to say that they can stop repossessions or have a grace period around repossessions for mortgage holders because interest rates have gone up. But what about if rents have gone up? What about keeping a roof over the head of renters, making sure that they're not being evicted arbitrarily or unfairly or in huge numbers because of the crisis that we've currently got on our hands?
Thank you for joining us live, Ben Twomey, Chief Executive of Generation Rent.